John 15:2 is an interesting verse, and there's one word in particular that will engender significant theological debate in the classroom. It's also a great word to do a word study. I'll point it out as we go. Pon klema en emoi me pharon karpon ire alta. Kai pon ta karpon pharon kathaire alta. Hina karpon pleona phere. So it's each branch in me, not, then what's this word? Right, it's the present participle of pharaoh. The hint was you have may, so you know that what follows isn't an indicative. So not bearing fruit. Now here's your main verb with the subject in it, right? He lifts up. And we'll come back and talk about it. This is the theologically significant word. He lifts it up. Now what you have here is that you have the direct object, right? He lifts up every branch in me that is not bearing fruit. And then it's repeated, alta. This is a normal thing in John. So the alta actually is a repetition of that direct object. Then you get the conjunction and every the fruit bearing. So it's a slightly different construction. So it's every understood branch. So this is being understood right here. And what you have here is that ta is going with pharon. So it's the bearing fruit. There's your direct object of this participle. So you have another direct object, right? And then you have the verb, he prunes it in order that it might bear, again, watch your hints here. You got a hinna, you know that you're getting a subjunctive, right? So this is just a subjunctive of pharaoh, in order that it might bear more fruit. So it's a pretty interesting little verse to phrase. And I'm going to go ahead and phrase it and then come back and talk about ire. So when it comes to phrasing, what we need to highlight is the parallel statement that's the direct object. So I'm going to go ahead and put the verb on its own line. Then you have the conjunction. And you're going to have the same kind of construction, right? Get down to the verb, own line, and then here's the purpose clause. So probably what I'm going to should do is something like that. So every branch in me that's not bearing fruit, he prunes it. So the understanding is that this whole phrase is repeated in the alta. Then you have the main connector, and you have the same kind of construction. So I'm going to do the same thing. You have your verb and the repeated direct object, and then you have the purpose for why it's being pruned. So every branch in me not bearing fruit, he cuts off, he takes away. And secondly, every understood branch, right? Every branch, the one that is bearing fruit, he prunes it. Why? In order that it can bear more fruit. I still remember a Sunday school class from 30 years ago where they talked about pruning good fruit so you could be more productive. It was kind of convincing back in my workaholic days. Okay, let's just talk just briefly about the exegesis of the ire. And people can get pretty heated about this particular discussion. That's why I'm just going to introduce it and you can discuss it in class. I remember comments like, oh, my loving Heavenly Father would never cut off someone out of the branch. Well, That's just simply not true. In my interpretation, false believers, and Judas is the primary example of that, gets cut off and burned. But anyway, so the text says, I'll just read the NIV, and he cuts off, that's their translation of ire. ESV, it's he takes away. CSB, it's removes. NLT is cuts off. So you can see this real unanimity among the different translations that this does not mean, as someone said, picked up off the ground so that it would start to bear fruit. That's not what's going on, I believe, in this verse. Now, to be honest, if you go to iro, it can mean to raise to a higher place or position. In other words, lift up, take up, pick up. But it's really interesting when you start looking at the examples that BDAG gives you. They picked up stones to throw at him. The mighty angel took a stone and threw it into the sea. See, in all of these, there's the idea of removal. In Matthew 17:27, it's you pick up the fish and take the shekel out of its mouth. You can pick up snakes, but that's in the longer ending of Mark, so that doesn't really apply. Here you have the paralytic being told to pick up your bed and walk. So even when iro is kind of a weakened meaning of to lift up, there's usually a sense of whatever's being lifted up isn't going to stay there. When you get down to I would say its most dominant meaning is to lift up, to move from one place to another, to carry away, to remove. And this is where the predominant use of iro is. It's really interesting to look at the footnote in the Net Bible, and actually I need to make this a lot bigger because the note's so long. It's a very interesting discussion. And their conclusion, after covering both options, is that this is that an unfruitful branch is cut off the vine and thrown away because it's not productive. And they talk about theologically, if you want to push the metaphor, the cut off branch is a false disciple, like Judas. But that's really going beyond, I think, what Jesus intends in this passage. The whole point is you have to bear fruit. And if you're looking at a vine and it's got the vine, and then you got branches coming off of it, if there are branches that aren't bearing fruit, you cut them off. That's the whole point, because you don't want them sucking up the energy of the vine from the branches that are bearing fruit. And I think my approach to this is not to get too theological. Well, is this really a Christian who lost his faith, or is he never a Christian to begin with? I think that's going beyond what Jesus is saying. And that's why you need to talk about this in class. The whole point of this passage is bear fruit. That's what God expects from us, to bear fruit. And if you go down just a few verses, you can see it again in verse 6. If you do not remain in me, you are like a branch that is thrown away and withers. Such branches are picked up and thrown into the fire and burned. So the whole point that Jesus is making is that as disciples of Jesus Christ, we are called to be fruitful. Not being fruitful is not an option. So enjoy your class discussion.